So following up on my previous video, there have been a few questions, and I thought that probably be a good idea to make another video and address a few of them. And I really do appreciate everyone who took the time to comment and reach out to me directly. There were quite a few really good questions that came in. Through the time that I was at the trust, the 6 years I was there, and especially the last 2 years, I did my best, I thought, to get accurate information out to the public. But apparently the means that we were using, the public meetings, even though some of them were broadcast through social media and some of that, there is still a lack of information out there, accurate information. So I thought I would make another follow-up video and do my best to explain a few of these things. And once I'm done with this video, if anyone has additional questions, reach out to me, let me know, and I will, if possible, make another video to help address some of those. Also, keep in mind, I am not a trustee anymore. I'm not part of the trust in any way. The trust has not asked me to make these videos, nor has anyone from the trust asked me to make these videos. I am doing this merely because I have a certain level of knowledge from my time there, and I want accurate information out there for the public to have. So let's start with the first question, and that is, who owns the trust? And that's a really good question. And nobody owns the trust, which may seem a little bit odd to some, but a charitable trust has a board of trustees that manage the trust, but the trust itself is established within a state. In this case, it's the state of Utah. It has a charter that governs the trust, how it's to be run. Everything that's in the trust is owned by the trust, but no individual person owns the trust, if that makes sense. So the trustees are empowered to make decisions for the trust, but even the trustees, they don't own anything. They have no more rights to anything within the trust than anyone else that's within the beneficiary class. So who owns the trust? The trust owns the property that's within the trust, and it's managed by a board of trustees. Okay, so why can't the trust be dissolved and the town run like, any other normal town? I think this was from Red Jessup. Thank you for your question. That's a good question. It really is. And when the board was empowered in 2015, they had the same attitude and still have that same attitude, that it makes sense to let people govern their own affairs. Roughly 3 years ago, we did a strategic planning session where we laid out the next 10 years and hopefully the ability to wind the trust down completely within that 10-year period. So it's roughly 3 years into that period. And here's where the numbers are as far as residential, because that was the number one priority and still is. So in Utah, there are 223 properties, residences or buildable lots. And of those, 15 do not have a deed decision or are already deeded out of the trust. So roughly 7% of the property in Hilldale is still in the trust and not on its way out right now. So it's down to 7%. In Colorado City, the numbers are a little bit higher because we didn't get subdivision into Colorado City until several years after Utah. So the numbers in the Arizona half of the town, we have 441 total properties, and of those, 151 do not have a deed decision or have been deeded out, out of the trust. So that would mean 290 right now have either been deeded out of the trust or are in the process of closing and working their way through being deeded out of the trust. And of those 151, 68 don't want a deed decision. So that would be individuals who identify, let's say, as FLDS or something along those lines, to where, for whatever the reasons are, they don't feel like they can or should approach the trust and ask for a deed decision. So we've got, take 68 out of that 151, you're left with 98 deed decisions left on the Arizona side. So that's roughly 15% left on the Arizona side. So as you can see, major progress has been made towards that end of dissolving the trust. I did notice that one of the questions dealt with occupancy agreements and loans. So occupancy agreements, we've got roughly 7% of Utah, 15% of Arizona still have occupancy agreements. That's it. Everything else has been moved on. As far as loans, And there has been some question over the years, why is the trust even making loans on these properties? So let me talk about that for just a brief minute. One of the first things we realized as we were deeding property out on the Utah side, among many other issues that came up, was that the people by and large are not a wealthy people, don't have a lot of extra money, or just money in general. It's hard to come by for a majority of those in the beneficiary class. And the second thing that we ran into was that traditional mortgages were just pretty much non-existent as far as availability here in the Valley, for multiple reasons. There'd never been a real estate market here, and the banks were a little bit skittish of loaning out in this area. Another major issue was that the majority of the houses didn't qualify for a mortgage. They were in various states of not being complete, not being finished. So the trustees decided that, you know what, it makes sense to do seller financing. So the trust started offering financing on the properties that were leaving to help finance the amount that was not distributed. So that when a property is distributed out, there's a percentage that is distributed. That's what the individual received for no cost to them. And then there was a part that was not distributed. That was what they had to pay, and it was anywhere from 0 to 100%. So with those amounts of money, the trust began its seller finance program. The majority of the seller financing is between 3 to 5 years. Some of them were 10, and I believe there's one that I can think of that was, I think, 15 or 20 years. But tried to keep those very short in term. And the seller financing is run through a mortgage company. The trust does not do it. You have to have special state licensing and everything to even do that, to do that sort of financing on that large of a scale. I think it was outside of 2 or 3 deals. You have to be have the proper certifications to even do seller financing. So as far as the seller finance and the trust still having control over any of the properties that have seller financing attached, it's no different than, say, when you take out a standard mortgage on a house or an auto loan or something along those lines. It's, yeah, the bank has an interest, the bank has a lien against the property, the bank can foreclose if you don't make the payments. It's the same thing here. The trust can foreclose if the payments are not made and reclaim their value in the property. Other than that, they have no say on what's going on that property. Whoever has the property, it's up to them how they want to manage the property, take care of the property, distribute the property, do whatever they want to do with that property. The trust has no say. They're out of it. They're done. It's private property. The private market will dictate what happens. Okay, let's talk just briefly about the trust and the default judgment that was entered into, not the default judgment that was entered into, but just default judgments in general. And these were some questions that came up. I think this is on the Facebook, where there's a little bit of confusion between the default judgment that the state of Utah was trying to avoid the trust going into, and also some of the criminal cases that were being pursued against Warren Jeffs at the same time. So when we had individuals like Uncle Jim Allred and Micah and some of those in prison because they wouldn't answer to law enforcement, that had to do with criminal cases against Warren Jeffs, had nothing to do with a civil case, which was the case that had been filed against the trust. So a lot of court cases happening all around the same time. The civil case was the one that was being filed against the trust, and that was what the state of Utah stepped in and ultimately preserved the trust assets from being liquidated to satisfy a default judgment. All right. Next question is that I myself, I should feel good about what the trust has been doing because I walked away with a distribution. I walked away with something from the trust. And that's absolutely true. I did. In the time that the trust, since ever, I've petitioned for 3 things. 3 times I've sent in a petition to the trust. 2 of those have been granted, and all of these petitions went in while I was a trustee. Let me talk about the 2 that were granted. So the first one was a petition for my house and the vacant lot to the east of my house. So that was one petition. The second one was the 4 acres up above Utah Avenue. 4 acres up above, up in the industrial area, raw land in Utah. So that's the second one. The third one was another buildable lot that I had interest in. I put in a petition, and the trustees ultimately decided to reject that petition. So even though I was a trustee, and I think the trustees made the right decision, I really do, I was turned down on one of those petitions. Now there is the question on my house and on the vacant lot next to it. So let's talk about my house. Why would I feel good about the distribution I got on my house when other people who built houses here are coming in now and cannot even get a distribution? They can't get anything because there's really no inventory to give out. Well, a couple of things to keep in mind on my personal residence is that since I started, I broke ground on it in 1997, I moved in 1998, and I have lived here every single, well, I've never moved out. I've been here ever since. There hasn't been a year go by that taxes were not paid in full. When occupancy agreements were required, I signed an occupancy agreement in 2008. And also I kept up on the $100 a month that was required for an occupancy fee. So I don't know, very few people could make that same claim. So who would have thought that taking personal responsibility could have its benefits? But I took personal responsibility for where I live. That helped me because those are some of the factors right there in the trust document, is how you have taken care of and preserved trust assets. Well, paying taxes, maintaining the property, that is all preserving and taking care of trust assets. Cooperation with the trust, with the board, yeah. Paying that $100 a month, that's absolutely part of that. So yeah, those who, for whatever their reasons are, felt like they had to leave the community, leave their property, leave what they had built, unfortunately, they abandoned what they had put a lot of effort into. And while the trustees have made every effort possible to give them priority when property is available, if there's nothing available, there is nothing available to give. And it really comes down to timing. When those who initially started petitioning, the chances of getting something were much higher, because I remember a time when there was more inventory of houses than there were petitioners asking those looking and trying to get a benefit out of the trust. Completely flipped now. I mean, dramatically flipped. So the time in which you come forward makes a big difference. We had big debates when I first started as a trustee, is how long do we wait for individuals to come back? Because wanted to give everyone a benefit of a doubt, but we realized very, very quickly, we don't have crystal balls. We don't know. We have no idea of knowing when different people are going to decide, you know what, I can come back and ask. I have that right. Don't know. It's hard to say. And what we were tasked with doing is maintaining and preserving trust property. If a house sits there and is abandoned, is not lived in, it starts to go back to Mother Nature. It starts to fall apart. And if someone is not there paying the taxes, well, the state's going to come in and take the property. Neither one of those are options that, as a trustee, that we could allow to happen. Our job was to preserve and protect trust property. One of the ways of doing that was to bring somebody in who would take care of the property, who would pay the taxes. And that's when the policy was developed, implemented, and maintained to this day, that whoever was in the house and maintaining the house, keeping up on the property taxes and keeping up on the occupancy agreement fees and the occupancy agreement, they would be first in line when that house came up for a deed decision to get it out of the trust, even if they were not the initial builder. I've had individuals come to me and say, you know, that's really unfair. Well, how many people would come in and take responsibility for a property, pay the taxes, start improving it, start living there, if they knew at some point someone could show up and say, hey, I did the majority of the work on this house, it's now mine, and you have to move out? Very few. We needed individuals who would come in and take on the houses, who would take care of the houses, who would improve the houses. That's where that policy was developed. And that's how many, many houses in this valley were able to go to individuals who, looking back now, yes, admittedly, They were marginal participants, but they were the ones who stepped forward at the time when those houses were available, when petitioners were not, and said, yeah, we're willing to pay the taxes, we're willing to take on this property, we're willing to improve it. So that's how those happened. And for anyone who's curious, how did I get the empty lot next to my house? So let's talk about empty lots for a minute here. When Bruce Wyson was the fiduciary, he started a policy in Arizona, and I would assume he did the same in Utah, I don't know. I believe it was in Arizona because that's where I am, that anyone who would come in and take out an occupancy agreement on a vacant piece of land and pay the occupancy fee and pay the taxes, they would be first in line if and when that land was ever subdivided and available for sale. So before I was a trustee, I had an occupancy agreement not only on my house, but on the vacant lot next to me. So that is how I was able to get the empty lot that's next to my house. And for a period of time, the trustees also had a policy that builders of a house could also, if there's an empty lot next to their property, that they could also petition and receive that property. Well, it wasn't very long before we realized that all the vacant lots in Arizona were disappearing quickly. And so the vacant lot policy went through several changes through the years, and it ultimately ended up with, when there were just a few lots left, trying to maintain those lots for those who had put in significant effort, time, and money into the community, and yet there was nothing else for them to petition. So basically what we were referring to as A category individuals. Those are the ones who the empty lots were set aside for, and based off of the last public meeting that I attended, all the vacant lots now have been distributed out of Arizona. Something to keep in mind, when the board was empowered in 2015, 50% of the vacant lots in Arizona already had a name on them. Someone had an occupancy agreement that they had got through Bruce, and they had an occupancy agreement and were working towards ultimately hoping that someday they could end up with those properties. So 50% of the vacant lots in Arizona already had a name on them. And as long as those individuals maintained their agreement with the trust, yeah, when deeds started going out on vacant lots, they were first in line. And I know some who have looked around and said, well, how was that individual able to go and get that lot? How did that work? Many of them, even though they don't meet the qualifications that were required later on to get a vacant lot, that's how they ended up with those vacant lots. The board kept all the policies, all the decisions that Bruce had made in previous years. And just for those who are curious, the time frame that it takes, even for trustees, to get property out of the trust. So first I'm going to talk about the house and vacant lot next to me. This decision was made in January, I believe, January 6th of 2018. It didn't close until, May of 2019. So it took some time to work its way through. Over a year. There were no lot line adjustments, nothing complex, but in Arizona at that time, the trust was running into different issues, trying to get the taxes and everything else resolved, and everything to where it's flowing well within the Arizona real estate market. Something else to keep in mind on this. So that took over a year. Also, for anyone who cares, they can look at the intent to distribute round 14 that's on the trust website. And that's the one that shows not only the vacant lot next to my house, or that shows my house, it shows everyone else who had deed decisions around the same time. And then intent to sell round 12 shows the vacant lot. And you can look at that and you will see right off that it's definitely not just trustees that were receiving an extra lot next to their house. There were many individuals at the same time, builders of houses within the community, who were also getting a lot around that same time. That was the board policy that was being followed through. So now let's talk about the commercial property in Hilldale, since there were some questions about that. So this is 4 acres of land up above Hilldale, Utah Avenue. And these are 4 acres that have no utilities to them, nothing at all run up there, so there's no gas, water, sewer, power. These 4 acres had been on the auction, one of Bruce's auctions, before the trustees were empowered, and didn't sell. So they sat for a couple of years just accumulating additional back taxes. So in April of 2017, I had put in a petition for these 4 acres, and the board decided that they would look at that petition and ultimately granted it. What did I pay? Well, I paid roughly $7,500 per acre for the land, and $2,500, it was $2,489 in back taxes that was also due on this property. So $7,500 per acre for the 4 acres, and paid the back taxes. And anyone who wants to know, these details are on the intent to sell round 9. This was put up on the website October 6th of 2017. So everything's there. Just like I said in my last video, those who want to really look, everything's there. It's not like it's hidden. And I didn't receive any favors on this being a trustee. I put in the offer when it finally came up. I left the room. I wasn't party to the discussion nor the decision. And that's proper. That's how it should be. That's how the trust document gives guidelines on how to deal with these kind of transactions when a trustee wants to purchase something out of the trust. It's in the trust document, section 5, subsection 1, for anyone who wants to look it up. So it's completely proper and normal for a trustee to put in offers and to even receive property out of the trust. It just has to be done in the proper method. Okay, let's look at a couple other questions we had here. And that is, why are LDS families purchasing homes and the beneficiary class being denied? And that's a good question. It's a solid question. Number one, the religious affiliation of anyone who's petitioning doesn't make a difference. That's really not the trustee's business to know. And of the 674 properties in Utah and Arizona, I can think of about a half a dozen that would fall into this category. So it's less than 1%. But some say, hey, there shouldn't have been any that leave the trust. But you think about it, the ones that left the trust in this manner are ones that were full sale price. So yes, land went out of the trust, but money came back into the trust. So the actual value that the trust has stays the same. It stays consistent. And most of these houses are ones that sat on the trust website for more than a year. The trust policy was, in the first 30 days, then we hold it wide open for A petitioners, and then after that it went to B petitioners, and then C. And if it sat on there for more than 6 months, the trustees were open to considering D, which is someone who has absolutely no standing within the beneficiary class. They haven't ever built in the community. They weren't born here. They have no real connection other than they're just interested in purchasing property out of the trust. And so, yes, there were some properties that left the trust that were not those that were in the beneficiary class of the trust. And I think it was proper, and it was a good decision. We waited. We tried to find someone within the beneficiary class to take on some of these large houses, these big projects, and never could find anyone. We had a few petitions that came in, but there were some of these where the financials and the needs these individuals had, they couldn't even pay the back taxes, let alone try to maintain some of these houses. It wouldn't make sense to give them a distribution on it. It wouldn't help them in any way. It would become more of an albatross than anything else around their necks. Okay, so that's why some of the properties were sold outright to those who were outside of the community. There was a question of why are some people, let me start again. Why are trust employees able to buy extra land from the trust? Being a trust employee neither hurts nor helps the chances of an individual when putting in a petition. It makes no difference. And if you go through, look up on the trust website, all of the intent to sell listings that are on there. Many properties going to those who were not employees of the trust. There are a few that went to employees of the trust. It neither hurt nor helped. Now, while we're talking about trust employees, there are two cases that I specifically want to talk about here, where they not only they're unique in how they worked, and that was for both the in-house attorney that the trust had, and also one of the employees as condition of their employment. And until recently, the trust was extremely, for the lack of a better term, cash poor, but land rich. And so part of their employment, instead of being paid money, they took a house, the value of a house out of the trust. And it was not a distribution to them. They paid full market value on these houses. So there was one house in Utah, one house in Arizona that I can think of that fell into that category. I think that was proper, especially at the time. The trust was trying to figure out ways to attract and retain qualified help in certain areas. They didn't have a lot of money. They did have houses. It worked in that situation. Just because they being a trust employee, yeah, I guess it did help in that case because they had their wages reduced and were compensated through having a house sold to them from the trust. So those were the two cases that I can think of there. Other than that, trust employees, everyone, whether a trust employee or not, a petition comes in, it's based on the merit of the individual, and being an employee neither hurts nor helps the chance of a petition moving through at the trust. Okay. There were some questions on the parks. Why is the trust putting all this resource, the money that the trust has, why are we putting any of that into parks? And I can only think so far of one individual that I've talked to that has that opinion. Everyone else really likes the idea of parks. But regardless, why did the trustees clear back in the beginning set aside different areas of the community? Well, because something about growing up in this town, best term I can come up with, where we were kind of free range. We just went wherever we wanted. We wandered up and down the Short Creek Wash. We hiked the hills and the mountains. Just about everybody, we knew each other. We went to our neighbors' places. They came to ours. And it was very open as far as a community growing up. That is an essence that the trustees wanted to maintain as much as possible. Something that maintains that openness and that available to everyone aspect of the community. So a park is kind of like, if you think of a house, if you build a house with bedrooms only and no living area, that would kind of be like a community that has only private property, and no commons, no parks, no areas that are open and available to everyone. It makes sense to have commons, areas that you can gather, that you can have larger events, that the community can come together. That is the reason behind setting aside the various parks. And some of these were already established. If you look at the Cottonwood Park, that was already there. That one made sense to keep. It's kind of iconic, and a lot of resources have been put into that park to make it what it is today, and it's still not complete. Only phase 2 of I think at least 3 phases has been completed over there. There's still a lot of work to be done. There is also, in addition to that, the park over by Bees. That is going to be gorgeous, it's going to be beautiful, and it's going to be very nice. If you're going out to the Bees, to have that kind of an area right next to it, it makes sense, it works well. And if you don't give areas for people to congregate, they'll make areas, whether you want them there or not. So it makes sense to have parks. And it makes sense to maintain the Short Creek Wash wide open, end to end. We when I was a trustee, we had many individuals very upset that we would not give them the property down into the creek. They wanted to fence it off and have it just for them. Well, that would take away part of the essence of growing up in the Short Creek Valley, of being able to walk up and down that Short Creek Wash. That's part of the community. That's who we are. That is important to maintain open and free for everyone, to have that ability to go from end to end. What about the Old Woman's Shoe? How many remember going up there as kids, taking school trips up there? Yeah, let's maintain that. Let's give a way that is easy access, parking, and an area for picnics. Big Rock on the north end of town. That's kind of an iconic spot in town. And so these different areas, it made sense to set them aside and to keep them and to put resources in, because there will be many people, many individuals who have spent years building up this community who come back, and by the time they make their way back, there is a limited amount of resources available for them to petition for. But there will be a community and open areas that they, and let's hope that their posterity, can come and enjoy. It's open to everybody. It's the commons. It's available to all. And it's not to try to attract outside tourism, although I don't know that we should necessarily use that as a metric to decide whether to build parks or not. Let's make our town as beautiful as possible for us. It makes no sense to try to make our town unappealing just because that keeps outsiders out. That's how it was for years. When we had tacky fences and half-finished houses, it was unappealing. I think it's much better now with fences coming down, houses being finished, houses being painted. It feels better, it looks better. There's a community pride that's building. Those are all worthwhile. Those are worth having. We live in probably one of the most beautiful, naturally beautiful areas on this earth. I think we should recognize that, embrace it, and love it and take care of it. Let's make our community reflect what surrounds us. I think that's an awesome goal to push towards, is to have our yards and our houses and everything we do in our community just as beautiful as the natural beauty that you see on all sides. Okay, there was a question on making those who are coming back to the community and those who live here top priorities. Why isn't the trust making them top priorities? And the truth is they were and are top priorities. Why do you think that the first petitions that are looked at when a property becomes available are A category individuals? Those are people who spent their life building the community, who build a house here. They are given priority. So those who built the community are given priority. Those who live here, if you live here, as long as you've kept your agreements with the trust, you are first in line to petition for and to receive that property out of the trust. So absolutely, those who live here and those who have built houses here have priority. Now, we can get into C category, those who grew up within the community. And, there was a time when C category, their chances of getting something out of the trust were far more favorable than today. Right now, I just gave the stats. 6% of Utah, 15% of Arizona is all the residential property that's left in the valley. When I left the trust 9-10 months ago, there were, I believe, and I might be wrong, but I believe there were more than 1,000 petitions sitting there, unanswered petitions. As you can see, there are far more petitions for property than there is property available. And so there's going to continue to be those who are disappointed that their petitions are not met, they aren't fulfilled. And it's not that the trustees don't care and don't like them. Part of it's timing. When they put in a petition, property wasn't available. Or when they put in a petition, if property was available, they put in a petition, but there were others who put in petitions in the eyes of the trustees. And that's part of the job of the trustee. That's the hard part of it, is to make those hard decisions. How to decide which petition to grant and which ones to deny. That's why the ABCD method was incorporated, to help sort that through. And then from there, the lists were narrowed down to usually 2 or 3 individuals for a house. Those were brought in, interviewed, and then the trustees had the hard decision they had to grapple with. Which one makes the most sense in this case? And some of those decisions were very difficult. Sometimes there were competing petitions and both were equally qualified. Talk about difficult. So many of these decisions were not arrived at easily. There was a lot that went into them. The trustees, they grew up in the community. They were part of the community. They know the people. They know the difficulty. They know the attachment that many people have to this area. And they don't discount that. But at the same time, the trustees also have to look at what's in the trust document and follow what's in the document for making their decisions. they have to follow by the rules that are set out. They have to follow by the factors when considering the 9 factors. I had one individual ask me why we didn't consider just the family tie and that's it. Well, because that's not one of the factors. We can't consider that. Every single petition was judged on the merit of the petitioner, not on their parents or their grandparents. Because there's many individuals in the community whose parents or grandparents built most of the community. And if you went off of the merits of their ancestors, you couldn't even split it up among them. And then how would you decide which one of their grandchildren? You split it up equal shares among all of them? What about everyone else who also put in a significant amount into the community? You start to see the dynamic, how it becomes difficult on some of these decisions. But according to the trust document, this is what we had to go by. Decisions were made on the merit of the petitioner. So let's say that it's a 19 or 20-year-old kid. Their parents built a house. Their parents maybe even donated land into the trust. And this individual has a lot of attachment to their the house that their grandfather had. Unfortunately, that is not a factor that the trustees could consider. And so if and when that house became available, we looked at the petitions and those that aligned with the factors in the trust document. And let's say that a single mother who had grown up in the community and had children and had helped to build a house was also petitioning for this house. And it's not that the trustees don't care about those who have emotional and family ties to the house. It's just that is not a factor that we could consider. We can be aware of it, but it's not one of the 9 factors that was considered. Kind of a long explanation. I hope that helps. I hope that makes sense. But that is how some of these decisions were arrived at. And it's not that the trustees don't care about a lot of the young guys that are growing up in the community and wanting to be a part of the community and to build here. There is just a limited amount of resources available. And many of these, the younger guys, yeah, I guess you could say they've been pushed out by those who petitioned early on. I don't know that there's much that could be changed on that, because no matter what, there's when you've got a finite level of property available, it's always going to go to the ones who come first as a general rule. And the trustees did their best to try to implement policies to pace that out and to try to help those who had put into the community receive at least something back out. That was one of the goals of the trustees, and continues, as far as I know, to be one of the goals that they have. So I think I've covered the majority of these questions that I saw come up. As I said at the beginning, if there are any additional questions, if you want me to clarify something, let me know. And I'm busy. I'm doing this video late at night, trying to see if I can fit these in. I'm doing this to try to inform and educate the public and to have as much accurate information out there as possible. So if you're interested in these, if you appreciate them, let me know. It helps. If you have additional questions, comment on the video or reach out to me directly. I will do my best to address them, and I will always do my best to put accurate information out to this community. So I appreciate everyone. Take care. We'll see you.